Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 6, Creation of the Universal Form, Text 33. Padbyam Bhagavato Jagne Shushrusha Dharmasidhaye Tashyam Jata Pura Shudro Yadvritaya Tushati Hare. Padbyam, from the legs. Bhagavata, of the personality of Godhead. Jagne, became manifested. Shushrusha, service. Dharma, occupational duty. Siddhaye, for the matter of. Tashyam, in that. Jata, being generated. Pura, formerly. Shudra, the servitors. Yatvritya, the occupation by which. Tashyate, becomes satisfied. Hare, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Thereafter, service was manifested from the legs of the personality of Godhead for the sake of perfecting the religious function. Situated on the legs are the Shudras, who satisfy the Lord by service. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Service is the real constitutional occupation of all living entities. The living entities are meant to render service to the Lord, and they can attain religious perfection by this service attitude. One cannot attain religious perfection simply by speculating to attain theoretical knowledge. The Jnani division of spiritualists goes on speculating only to distinguish the soul from matter, but they have no information of the activities of the soul after being liberated by knowledge. It is said that persons who only mentally speculate to know things as they are, and who do not engage in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, are simply wasting their time. It is clearly said here that the principle of service was generated from the legs of the Lord for the sake of perfecting the religious process. But this transcendental service is different from the idea of service in the material world. In the material world, no one wants to be a servant. Everyone wants to become the master, because a false mastership is the basic disease of the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul in the material world wants to lord it over others. Illusioned by the external energy of the Lord, he is forced to become a servant of the material world. That is the real position of the conditioned soul. The last snare of the illusory external energy is the conception of becoming one with the Lord. And due to this conception, the illusioned soul remains in the bondage of material energy, falsely thinking himself a liberated soul and as good as Narayan. It is actually better to be a Shudra than to be a Brahmin and not develop the service attitude, because that attitude alone satisfies the Lord. Every living being, even if he be a Brahmin by qualification, must take to the transcendental service of the Lord. Both Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam support that the service attitude is the perfection of the living entity. A Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra can perfect his occupational duties only by rendering service unto the Lord. A Brahmin is supposed to know this fact due to his perfection in Vedic wisdom. The other sections are supposed to follow the direction of the Brahmin Vaishnav, one who is a Brahmin by qualification and a Vaishnava by action. That will make the entire society perfect in regard to the order of its social construction. A disordered society cannot satisfy either members of the society or the Lord. Even if one is not a perfect Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, but takes to the service of the Lord, not caring for the perfection of his social position, he becomes a perfect human being simply by developing the attitude of service to the Supreme Lord. That was a very wonderful purport by Srila Prabhupada. When I first just read the verse, I was thinking, well, I don't know how much material there will be here, just talking about Shudras being the legs of the body of the Virata Rupa, as described here by Maitreya Rishi. But then Srila Prabhupada gives such a wonderful purport here. It expands the whole idea of service and devotional service. And one thing that Prabhupada makes so clear in this purport is the difference between ordinary work, ordinary service and labor, and bhakti, devotional service, which is really the perfection of human beings. So we know that service is our position. Majjhalila 2108 says, Jivara Sarupaya Krishnara Nichidas Krishnara Tishtashti Shakti Bheda Bheda Prakash. It is the living entity's constitutional position to be an eternal servant of Krishna because he is the marginal energy of Krishna and a manifestation simultaneously one with and different from the Lord. So service is not something that we simply take on or something that is imposed upon us, but service is part of our core being. It is who the soul is. We are servant. And so Prabhupada points out that if we don't want to be servant in the spiritual world, we get to be servant in the material world, servant of material nature. So service is always there. Now, this verse is specifically talking about the position of the Shudra. The Shudra is the worker or the labor class, as we might say in the West. And we see that this is found in every society. These different aspects of Varnashram are not something that are imposed artificially. As Prabhupada pointed out, these are natural divisions of human society. In every society that you're going to see people who are workers, people who are business people who are either military or people who are managers and leaders, and people who are the intellectual class. So the Varnashram system is something that is naturally there in human society. But we're making this distinction here is the difference between simply one who is working, whether it be in a materialistic situation or even in a Varnashram situation, and one who is working on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one who is performing devotional service. I was thinking about this a little bit recently. Actually, in America, we have a holiday called Labor Day. Do you have anything like that in India? You do. You have Labor Day? Yeah, so Labor Day is supposed to glorify the Shudras, right? It's supposed to glorify the working class. Now, it's interesting. Now, for most people, we have it at the first weekend in September, which is the end of the summer. So it's a holiday for people to simply have an extra day off, an extra last, holiday of the summer. But originally, it actually started back in the late 1800s as a tribute to the accomplishments of the workers. Actually, it was in a time of great strife between labor and management. There were riots, there was unionizing, there was so much fighting going on, and the labor union said, we should have a day to give us some recognition. And the government thought, well, that's a good idea. That'll be a way to appease them. Just give them a day. They say, sure, we call it Labor Day. Everybody likes a holiday. It doesn't cost anybody too much. So that was sort of the origin of Labor Day. But it's interesting because this idea of labor or work is a reflection of the real spiritual principle of service. Of course, devotees, we don't so much talk about work or labor. We call it service or seva or bhakti, right? In other words, it's a very different connotation that work, service has to the devotee as to the non-devotee. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, about what devotional service is and how service contrasts to the ordinary service in the material world, which is a theme that Prabhupada elaborated quite a bit in this purport. It's interesting because when they celebrate Labor Day, and I suppose they do the same thing in India, they take a day off, they have a day off for Labor Day, so they celebrate labor by not laboring. The idea is that you don't want to work, and so you take a day off. Of course, that's very different for devotees. Devotees, when we have a holiday, what do? We try to increase our service, right? If we have a big festival, we try to be in the temple, either participate directly, putting on, so much is needed, so much cooking, pujaari work, dressing the deities, or at least we try to come and participate more, we try to hear and chant more. So for a devotee, A holiday means a time for more service, not to stop working or have less service. So, and you can see that even when we have a special event, like here we are having in the Govardhan Eco Village, you've also kindly hosted us to have our spiritual strategic planning meetings, our GBC meetings, all of these things. So it's a very kind of a special time. It's a nice opportunity, but it actually means probably a lot more work for all the residents here at Govardhan Eco Village, and that's very much appreciated. In other words, you're increasing your service to the devotees. So that's a very nice thing. That's what devotees like to do and appreciate doing. So, not only do the non-devotees wish to decrease work or take a time off, but they're really only going to work as long as there's some material compensation. As long as there's some reward, there's some pay, the work will go on, otherwise not. In fact, the whole labor movement, when you think about it, what did they want? They wanted more money, they wanted less hours, more holidays, in other words, less service was the idea, less service and more reward. And most people will not continue their job if they're not paid. I mean, it's natural. I mean, it's not something unusual. Anyone who is working, they're not going to continue that job if the pay is not there. In America, sometimes they have lottery here too. They have these things where you win prizes. Again, big thing. So lottery's big in America too. So people dream about winning the lottery. And what's the first thing people want to do when they win the lottery? Yeah, stop working. Go on vacation, quit their job because now they have money, which means that they wouldn't be doing that job if it weren't for the pay. It's very unusual if somebody actually likes their job. Some people, like their work, and that's considered to be like very special. It's like a rare person who actually enjoys the work that they're doing. So devotees are not like this. Devotees actually try to increase their service even without pay or even without a reward. Because this is our position, and this is the position that actually the devotee is happy and well situated in that devotional service. There was one story that Tamohar Krishna Goswami was telling. He said that once I think it was in Los Angeles, and he was the temple commander, and he was doing so much service, or I forget what exactly the circumstance was, but he was working very, very hard. And he said to Prabhupada that, he just couldn't take it anymore. It was just too much. It was too much stress, too much anxiety. And Prabhupada told him, we should pray for this situation, to be so constantly engaged in Krishna's service that Maya cannot find any means to enter. This is fortunate. So the devotee feels fortunate if they have so much service, So it is a very special fortune if we do have a great deal of service. And it's something that the devotee actually prays for. When we were chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, we were saying, Dear Radha, dear Krishna, please engage me in your devotional service. We're actually asking for service and hoping for more service, which is very different from the non-devotee who is trying to see how little service or how they can get away from that service as much as possible. The non-devotees basically, as we said, do not really enjoy their work and they want to give it up. On the other hand, the devotees find their greatest pleasure in devotional service. It is what really gives us happiness. Srila Prabhupada explained this in a purport in Bhagavad Gita 1854. He said, the devotee in Krishna consciousness has nothing for which to lament or desire. Since God is full, a living entity who is engaged in God's service in Krishna consciousness becomes also full in himself. He is just like a river cleansed of all dirty water. Because a pure devotee has no thought other than Krishna, he is naturally always joyful. He does not lament for any material loss or aspire for gain because he is full in the service of the Lord. He has no desire for material enjoyment because he knows that every living entity is a fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord and therefore eternally a servant. So we actually wish to increase both the quality and the quantity of our service. We are always praying for more service to be able to be fully engaged and also to be able to be more deeply engaged and to be able to engage on a deeper and deeper understanding of Krishna consciousness and a more surrendered platform in our service to Krishna. I think all of us have this experience sometimes, as Tamohar Krishna Goswami was saying, of feeling overwhelmed or feeling like we have so much service or too much to do or like that. And but sometimes I've thought about this, and when it does feel like that there's just so much to do, and you think, I wish, you might think, I wish I didn't have quite so much or there was less service, but actually we are very, very fortunate to have that service. As Prabhu was saying, that we should strive for that position when we have so much to do. So if you find that you're fully engaged, you're actually being blessed by Krishna. A devotee who doesn't have any service is unfortunate, right? If a devotee somehow finds themselves where there's no the service they can do, or that they're not engaged, or they're not in association with devotees, or whatever the situation may be, that is an unfortunate position. The fortunate position is to be engaged in service. I mean, of course, realistically, there has to be a balance in our life. We all need to have, proper rest, proper, our sadhana, which I'll talk about in a little bit. All of that must be there. We're not saying as you should foolishly work 20 hours a day, not sleep, etc. But the point is that service is what really sustains the soul. It's what gives us real happiness. It's our real purpose in life. And so we should really embrace that service and try to deepen that attitude of service. Another thing is interesting when I was thinking about service in the material world compared to the spiritual world, and looking at, say, the labor movement and people who are workers, there's usually an adversarial relationship with management, right? There's in other words, they're usually not just getting along really well. There's the workers and there's the bosses, right? And there's some conflict often, or there's some envy between them. Because as Prabhupada was saying in this purport, he was saying nobody wants to be a servant, right? He says, in the material world, no one wants to be a servant. Everyone wants to become the master, because false mastership is the basic disease of the conditioned soul. The conditioned soul in the material world wants to lord it over others. So everybody wants to be the master. Everybody wants to be in charge, to be in control. And if you're not, it's considered something wrong, that you're in a deficit position. It's something to be strived for, right? People will work, for someone else. What is the idea? Somebody serves their boss, their master, very, very nicely. For what purpose? So they will eventually come to that position where they can be master. So that's really what it's about in the material world, this striving to become master. Where in the spiritual world, we are actually content. Not only content to be servant, but we understand that that's actually our constitutional position and the highest position, and the position of real happiness for the soul. So when people do not want to see anybody else in charge, I want to be the master, I don't want to take any instruction from anybody else, this is basically the envious nature of the living entity. We all come into this material world with a certain amount of envy. And when that envy is there, we have a reluctance to serve. But devotional service is very different, because our relationships in Krishna consciousness are not based upon envy, at least they shouldn't be. If there is envy there, there's something wrong. It's not bhakti. Devotional service is based upon the principle of love. Bhakti means loving devotional service. So loving devotional service should be there in our relationships. It should be there in our service. So, in other words, if I am in charge of someone as a devotee, my relationship should be one of love, one that I am lovingly trying to engage that person and help them in Krishna consciousness. And for someone who's my superior, I'm trying to serve them nicely also, so that Krishna consciousness is going on well. I saw this expression when I was very, very young. Well, not expression, I saw this quote. Actually, it was interesting. This church I went to, I guess they got some deal where they had all these pencils, sometimes how you put on pencils, you put slogans, or you put some advertising. So they had thousands and thousands of these. So these were around all through my childhood. We had all these pencils, and they had a quote. And it was a quote from, Khalil Gibran, he wrote a book called The Prophet. It's very popular in the West. He was sort of a mystic poet and writer from the Mideast. And this quote is from the Prophet said, "Work is love made visible." And it was interesting because I just saw these, and I had these pencils, for years and years. I had absolutely no idea what that meant. How works, how is that, And finally, it wasn't until I became a devotee that I realized, he's talking about bhakti, right? In other words, our outward expression of love for Krishna and for the devotees is our work or our service, right? In other words, like Prabhupada to give the example, you don't just say, "Oh yes, I love you, I love you, I love you." Well, could you do this for me? No. Would you help me with it? No. Could you give? No. In other words, if there's no service, if there's no exchange, how is it love? It's just lip service. It's simply words. But the manifestation of that love is through our service. That's how we show it. That's how we express it. And that is how we express it eternally with Krishna in the spiritual world. So, if we don't have a relationship of bhakti and love, the relationship will be one of envy, or will be one of so many material motives that are there. And that the closer we are to real love in our relationships and our service attitude, then the more that we give up envy. It's actually almost it's almost like one is the opposite of the other. You have love and you have envy. If you have love, you don't have envy. If you have envy, you don't really have love. As a material example, Srila Prabhupada sometimes gave us the example of a mother and child. Srila Prabhupada said, a mother and a child is the closest example to true love in the material world. Now, why is that? Because the mother is not doing the service to the child for any self-motivation. Now, we can't say everyone is completely without self-motivation. It's Kali Yuga, and, we read all kinds of horrible stories, parents killing their children, et cetera, et cetera. But at least ideally, we can understand that a good parent has the interest of the child in mind. And those of us who are parents, we experience this. If your child becomes successful, do you become envious? No, you become happy, right? In fact, the parent is always hoping that the child will do better than them, right? There's no envy there. Isn't that true? Don't all your parents, they want you to be successful? And sometimes when you become a Hare Krishna, they become a little disturbed sometimes because that's not their idea of what being successful is. Or maybe they do. Maybe they're supporting it, maybe not. But the point is, their desire is that you be happy and you be successful. So there is some little semblance. There's a reflection of that spiritual love that we can see in the material world. Now, it's maybe there in other relationships as well, but it's probably there in its closest form in a relationship between parents and children. So the devotee takes that a step further. And the devotee tries to have that relationship of care and love with ultimately all living entities, if one is extremely advanced in Krishna consciousness. But at least to begin with those around us. At least begin at home. At least begin with those devotees that we are associating with, our friends, our godbrothers, our godsisters, our associates, our family members. Those, we should try to develop this relationship. Prabhupada gave a nice description of how devotional service is antithetical to this idea of envy. This is from a lecture in Ahmedabad, 1972. Srila Prabhupada said, devotees, they are paradukkha dukhi. The symptom of a devotee is they are unhappy by seeing others unhappy. Generally, a person, if he sees somebody happy, he becomes unhappy. Matsara, matsarata. That is the world's situation. If I see my brother's very happy, he's improved his material condition, then I become unhappy. Therefore, spiritual advancement means for a person who is not envious. Paramo nimatsaranam satam vastavam vastu vejam. Bhagavatam 1:1-2. Matsara means envious and nirmatsara, non-envious. This is called material condition, and we are envious. This is the position, and therefore Krishna begins the Bhagavad Gita to get out of this ignorance and enviousness, and this is the basic principle of Bhagavad Gita. So it's such an important concept that Prabhupada is saying this is the basic principle of Bhagavad Gita, to get out of this envious situation. And in fact, in the Bhagavad Gita 9:1, Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, He's saying, my dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, anusuyave, right? Non-envious. He said, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge. So giving up envy is a prerequisite for understanding spiritual knowledge. One cannot receive spiritual instruction, spiritual knowledge, if there's an envious heart. Of course, we all start out with an envious heart. That's why we're in the material world. So we are not free from envy, but we have to at least give it up enough. We have to give up a little bit of the envious nature so that we can hear the words of the spiritual master and hear the words of Krishna. When one has a little bit of willingness to hear, then spiritual life can begin. So sometimes this is difficult to understand because we often feel like, I don't really feel like I'm envious of Krishna or that I'm envious. It's like, it's something that it seems like a very strong word. We don't think, am I envious? But that original envy is there. The fact that we're in this material world sort of proves that we do have some envy. So the original envy is there of Krishna, and then it spreads to envy of other living entities. So what is the cure, the antidote for that? The opposite of envy is the service attitude. So if we take up the attitude of service, we destroy envy, and envy will start to fade away. So the devotee has the desire to serve everyone. And this will develop with our spiritual advancement. The more that we advance in Krishna consciousness, the more we have this pure desire to serve others and give up envy. And conversely, the more that we serve and give up envy, the more that we feel spiritual advancement. So when we see this service attitude, it's so much appreciated, isn't it? It's like, Prabhupada says that humility is the ornament of a devotee. Well, along with this humility is also, we could also say, is the opposite of envy. So one has a humble attitude, and this attitude of service towards others, it's very, very wonderful, and it's very, very pleasing. Just like since I've been here at Govardhan Eco Village, my very first time here, I'm very fortunate to be here, and so much thank you all for inviting us. The devotees here have been so kind, have been so wonderful, and have displayed such a nice service attitude. So sometimes we're rushing around, and but trust me, it's appreciated. It's very much appreciated. When devotees see other devotees are trying to serve very nicely, it's very much understood. And it's very much appreciated. And we can understand that those devotees have some spiritual understanding. Or at least they've been given good instruction so that they're developing good understanding. So it's a very nice thing. And, you don't see that everywhere, to be honest. Some places, devotees have not been trained or instructed so much in this attitude of serving the Vaishnavas. And other places, it's there very much. I just know from my association with Radhanath Swami that this is something he stresses all the time, isn't it? Doesn't he talk about service to devotees, practically every class or every other class, very, very commonly. So this is very important. This is an extremely important principle. And the more that we take on that attitude, not only is it pleasing to the devotees, but we also feel the spiritual advancement, feel the spiritual benefit. So the devotee is very happy when they see others happy in Krishna consciousness. As Prahlad Maharaj is saying, he's only unhappy when he's seeing the unhappiness of others. So our greatest pleasure is to give Krishna consciousness to others and with the devotees. So that's the other aspect of the devotee's attitude of service. We want to be able to give service to at least human beings, if not all living entities. And that is why we follow in the footsteps of Srila Prabhupada, and we understand that this mood of preaching, because it is a mood of service. It's a mood of service to help the living entities who are suffering in this material world. The conditioned souls are undergoing great trial and tribulation, transmigrating through 8,400,000 species of life, experiencing so much unhappiness. So the devotee, out of their compassion, sees that unhappiness and wants to give them Krishna consciousness. And that's actually another form of service. Right? It's all service attitude. So we don't distinguish, so we only serve senior devotees or advanced devotees. No, we actually try to render service to all living entities by giving them Krishna consciousness to whatever degree they're able to benefit from it. And along with this service attitude, we gain personal benefit. So not only does this rightly situate us and give pleasure to the devotees and help other living entities, but we will also feel personal benefit by developing this attitude of service. And one of those benefits that we receive is we become purified. Devotional service is the process of purification for the heart of the conditioned soul. If service is the opposite of envy and the root cause of our being in this material world is envy, then what do we need to do? We need to perform devotional service to clear away, to purify that enviousness in the heart. And that service is active engagement in Krishna consciousness. Service is not a theoretical, activity. It's not something that, well, I'm thinking very devotionally. No, I mean, it's an active principle. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Jiva Goswami, in his commentary on 1.1.11, famous verse, talked about two forms of bhakti. He said there's the bhava rupa, which is the emotional form of bhakti, which is the internal process. That's our internal service, my internal development of love of Krishna. But that bhava rupa is really only fully manifested at the bhava stage. It's a very, very high stage of Krishna consciousness. So some of you may be experiencing that. For the rest of us, there is the active form, Chesta Rupa Bhakti. So Chesta Rupa Bhakti is active use of the body, the mind, and the words. And that means practical engagement in Krishna consciousness. So until we become extremely advanced, and even when we become advanced, service is always there. But it may become more internalized. But until that point, we need to be very active in using everything, using the senses, using the mind, using the body in Krishna's service. And Srila Prabhupada always emphasized this. Of course, we were very neophyte, and we were young and we were passionate. Now we're old and passionate, but anyway, Prabhupada knew, especially the Western mentality, our minds were very restless. And Prabhupada knew that the only way of purifying that was to engage us 24 hours a day, engage us completely in Krishna consciousness, and that is the way for purification. And we see how Prabhupada emphasized that constantly. He was always pushing us, he was motivating us, he was imploring us towards greater and greater activities of service, particularly in book distribution. Prabhupada, pushed us to distribute books. He pushed us to do so many things. Many of you have heard of the famous Chaitanya Charitamrita publishing marathon. No? You know about the Chaitanya Charitamrita? Okay, some of you know. Anyway, Srila Prabhupada was translating Chaitanya Charitamrita. Now, I'm old and my mind is, not so good on my memory. What year was this? 70? Do you remember, Maharaj? That's what I was thinking. Yeah, 74. And Prabhupada had translated the Chaitanya Charitamrita. The problem was there was a very, very big lag in Prabhupada's translating and the BBT actually publishing. Because once he translated, they had to write it all down. It had to be edited. It had to be published. And, so many things that are required in publication. The artists had to paint the paintings. And so it was going very, very slowly. And so they said, and Prabhupada met with the BBT staff, and he said something. He said, what is, he was a little disturbed. And I think Rameshwara Maharaj was the head of the BBT then. He said something like, I think we can do a book every 2 months. Was it 3 months? And Prabhupada said, no, finish in the 2 months to the 3 months. I forget the exact time. Maybe I remember. Was it 2 months? 2 months. And how many volumes are there? There were 17 volumes originally. Now the more condensed versions, but 17 volumes. 2 months. And they said it's impossible. And I don't know if that's when Prabhupada said, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. I think that was the time when that quote was made. Prabhupada said, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. So Prabhupada did not accept that anything was impossible. And so he pushed them, and somehow or another, through incredible endeavor, and I don't think those devotees slept very much in those 2 months, they completed it. They did it. They completed in the deadline, which they just thought was impossible. So Prabhupada was actively engaging the devotees like that, to work very, very hard for Krishna. And it wasn't just a matter of, well, Prabhupada wanted to work us really hard. Prabhupada knew how important it was that he knew he only had a few years. He knew he had to complete his translation work. He knew he needed to get these books out. He knew that the conditioned souls of this material world needed to have this Vedic literature, have the Srimad Bhagavatam, have the Chaitanya Charitamrita Bhagavad Gita. This was so important to him that he had to push the devotees to get it done. And at the same time, he knew we needed that. We needed that surrender to be able to advance in Krishna consciousness. So there's so many examples like that. One nice quote that sort of exemplifies this concept in the Nectar of Instruction. Srila Prabhupada says, endeavor executed with intelligence in Krishna consciousness is called utsaha, or enthusiasm. The devotees find the correct means by which everything can be utilized in the service of the Lord, yukta vairagya. The execution of devotional service is not a matter of idle meditation, but practical action in the foreground of spiritual life. I always found that's worded so nicely. I'll read that again. The execution of devotional service is not a matter of idle meditation, but practical action in the foreground of spiritual life. So again, this practical action is what is required for the process of purification, for the process of connecting with Krishna through bhakti yoga. Now, there also needs to be a balance of sadhana and service. It's not that we simply work 24 hours a day and neglect our hearing and chanting. That is also service. There are 9 processes of devotional service, and the first, of course, is Shravanam Kirtanam. So Shravanam Kirtanam, or the Bhajana Kriya, must also be there. And the two must both be there working simultaneously, and one enhances the other. So the 2 tracks of service and sadhana, sometimes we talk about, the processes of the Goshti Nandi and the Bhaja Nandi, or, there's different ways that it's sometimes described is how there's the preaching activity and there's also the sadhana. And one enhances the other. As we engage more and more in hearing and chanting, our desire for service will increase. And as our service increases, we find more desire to hear and chant. So they will work very synergistically together, that both can increase simultaneously. I had a very nice example of this in 1973 in my initiation letter. The temple president had written to Srila Prabhupada, and he gave us our names for initiation, but he also asked some questions of Prabhupada. Sometimes he did that. So sometimes you'll get a letter, and has many things. Has an answer to the temple president, has your spiritual name in it, has a few other things, and Prabhupada would make some other just preaching points. They're always very wonderful. It was always like we always just looked forward. I mean, it was something that in the whole movement we looked forward to getting Srila Prabhupada's letters and exchanging the letters and passing them around and that sort of thing. So in this letter to the temple president, he had asked him, he said, some of the devotees complain about over-endeavor. I guess they thought the temple president was working him too hard, so they were complaining. And so Sri Govinda, he was the temple president in Chicago, said, what about this over-endeavor? And Prabhupada said, and this was in my letter of initiation, he said, there should be no complaint. Under all circumstances, we must chant regularly 16 rounds and attend the morning and evening classes. For Krishna, we can work like anything, but one lick done for Maya is useless over-endeavor. That's very interesting. So Prabhupada defined over-endeavor as anything that we do that's not Krishna conscious. Any materialistic work or activity, that's over-endeavor. But anything for Krishna is good. But he emphasized chanting 16 rounds, attending the programs, attending the classes, that must be there. Otherwise, what will happen? we'll forget what that service is for, right? After a while, we will start to look at service as work or labor or something mundane, and we will forget the point behind it. And we'll think, why am I working so hard? Who am I working for? If we are not regularly hearing and chanting and understanding Bhakti Yoga. One other point I wanted to make is sometimes, I don't know if this ever happens in India, but sometimes in America, some devotees, they get into a mood that, all of this service and all of this sadhana, this is for beginners. This is for neophytes, and now we should become more advanced, and we should be we should be on the spontaneous platform. We should be striving for the Raganuga Bhakti. You ever hear that? Is that? Yeah, that's everywhere, right? So now, there's nothing wrong with Raganuga Bhakti. Raganuga Bhakti is part of the process of sadhana. Sadhana is two parts, Vaidhi Bhakti, Raganuga Bhakti. Vaidhi Bhakti is, practice. Raganuga is spontaneous practice of the principles of devotional service. But we need to understand that the sadhana and the service comes first. We cannot artificially jump to some point above that. Now I'm too advanced. Now I'm beyond that. I don't have to do this anymore. There's a couple things I wanted to read. This is from Madhya Lila 22:109, Srila Prabhupada's purport. It says, dormant love for Krishna exists in everyone's heart, and it simply has to be awakened by the regulative process of devotional service. One has to learn to use a typewriter by following the regulative principles of the typing book. There are regulative principles in a typing book. One has to place his fingers on the keys in such a way in practice. But when one becomes adept, he can type swiftly and correctly without even looking at the keys, right? If you're a good typist, you don't even think about it. It's spontaneous. You're doing spontaneous typing service then. Similarly, one has to follow the rules and regulations of devotional service as they are set down by the spiritual master. Then one can come to the point of spontaneous loving service. The love is already there within the heart of everyone, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema, which also goes to the point, it's not that, you need, somebody to come along and inject Raganuga Bhakti in your heart or something. It's already there, it's in your heart. But it is going to develop gradually by the process of sadhana and following the instructions of the spiritual master. It says spontaneous service is not artificial. One simply has to come to that platform by rendering devotional service according to regular principles. Thus, one has to practice hearing and chanting and follow the other regular principles by washing the temple, cleansing oneself, rising early in the morning, attending Mangal Artik, and so on. If one does not come to the platform of spontaneous service in the beginning, he must adopt regular service according to the instructions of the spiritual master. This service is called Vaidhi Bhakti. Now, when one becomes advanced, does one then give up all of this? No more Mangal Artik, no more rounds, no more doing this? No. One continues the process. I just saw this recently. Prabhupada began to translate a work called Narada Bhakti Sutra, and he only got through 13 verses, I guess, and because he thought it was interesting, and then he put it aside because he had to finish TLC or other works, and he never really got back to finish it. But this is from verse 12, which is one of the sutras that Prabhupada was able to translate, and this is from his purport. The verse is, one must continue to follow scriptural injunctions even after one has fixed up and determined certainty that devotional service is the only means for reaching perfection of life. So even when one is at that very, very strong, certain, fixed position of devotional service, one continues to follow scriptural injunction. And the purport, Prabhupada says, one who wishes to advance to the platform of Raganuga Bhakti must follow the injunctions of the authoritative scriptures under the direction of the spiritual master. According to Sutra 12, even a person on a highly elevated platform of devotional service must execute the rules and regulations of the scriptures. What to speak of persons who are not elevated? In other words, neophytes in devotional service must strictly and scrupulously follow the rules and regulations of the scriptures to rise to the platform of unalloyed devotional service. So when we say being a neophyte, that means you're not at the stage of Baba. So if you're not at that highly elevated stage, this applies to all of us. Very important that we follow the rules and regulations of sadhana bhakti. And that includes a strong service ethic, a sense of performing devotional service, of giving our time, giving our life, giving our words, giving our heart to the service of the Lord and to the service of the devotees. Okay, so I'll stop at that point. We have a few minutes if there's any other discussion, or if anyone has any other comments or questions.
Well, just a little comment, if it's okay, is that in the 7th canto, in the story of Lord Nrsingadev, after he kills Hiranyakashipu, then he offers Prahlad benediction, or he tells him actually, I want you to ask me for something, meaning like something material, some money or something. And Prahlad refuses and says that, no, I don't want anything like that. I just want to serve you, because it's so much nicer to serve.
Yes.
And a similar situation with Kolavecha Sridhar and Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya offered him that you're just, or this was, I think, during the Mahaprakash Leela. Lord Chaitanya had harassed him prior to that in his banana business, stealing bananas and things. And then when Lord Chaitanya revealed himself, Lord Chaitanya said that, I want to give you something. Would you like to become a Lord Brahma? And Kolavecha Sridhar saying, no, please, don't say things like that. Well, how about if I give you the 8 mystical cities? No, please, stop. In other words, the devotee service is just so nice, so much nicer. The devotee is not, what to speak of not being interested in other material things, but the devotee just doesn't want those things because they may distract him or her from the nectar of devotional service.
Okay. Thank you, Maharaj. Those very, very wonderful examples. I was thinking of this, of course, the story of Prahlad Maharaj is so instructive and so wonderful for us. But and then I was thinking then after that, after Prahlad Maharaj refused anything, I think Lord Nrsingadev insisted. He kept pushing. I must give you some benediction. So what is it that he finally asked for? For his father to be liberated, right? He said, then please liberate my father. You know, in other words, cleanse him of all of his sinful activities. So this was, Krishna Prahlad Maharaj is one of our most wonderful examples of the most elevated level of Vaishnavas, because not only did he not want anything for himself, but he only wanted good for others. Even he wanted his father to become benedicted after his father had tortured him and tried to kill him in so many ways. I mean, this is a heart that's obviously completely free from envy, you know. Now, very hard for us to even imagine ourselves in those positions or being at that standard, but that is the standard of the highest level of service. Thank you. Others? Anybody else? Okay, last chance. If you want to speak. Okay, thank you very much.